We're glad that you're all here with us tonight. Appreciate you taking time to learn a little bit about our propositions we have on the ballot. My name is Paul Minching. I'm the superintendent of the Harrisonville schools, and hopefully I can provide you a little bit of information and answer any questions that you might have. We've got a short presentation. Hopefully it's not too long. Sometimes I get a little lengthy, so we'll try to cover everything and then hopefully be able to answer your questions for you. So, and then I think Marcy has some stuff too, probably. So we do have two propositions on the ballot for April 7th. The election is April 7th. Those two items are Proposition I and Proposition N. I'm trying to get out of the way here. You can see me and all that good stuff. Jill, is the camera going to follow me, or how do you?
You'll be fine.
Is there a certain spot?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, all right. So our current reality, and we always start on the budgeting process with the revenue side. So our district revenue budgeted for this fiscal year is just over $28.5 million. And most of that, as you can see from the graphic there, comes from local funds. And by local funds, we mean your personal property tax and your real estate tax. And then 34% comes from state funds. State funds are from enrollment, student enrollment. And then 12% is your county and federal funds. County funds are anything from state assessed, it's called state assessed railroad and utilities, but it comes through the county. And that would be like a railroad spur, or if you have an oil or gas line, things like that. And then federal funds, and that's part of that 12% too. And federal funds are special education money and titles, so Title I services and things like that. So that's a pretty small percentage. And actually, we spend a lot more, particularly on special education, than we do on the revenue side, because we really can't control that. So if we have a lot of students that come to us and need some kind of outside placement or a paraprofessional with them, they become more expensive, and that's fine. It's just federal law requires us to provide those services to them, and we're limited on the revenue side. So that's one place where we really don't have a whole lot of control. And then on the expenditure side for 1920, you can see that we're just over $29 million budgeted for the expenditure side. So we are deficit spending. That's where we've been the last couple of years. And I'll get into the hows and whys of that here in a minute. But from the graphic again, you can see most of our expenditures come on the people side. So whether it's people that we directly employ through our salaries and benefits, or that we employ through purchase services, our maintenance and custodial, our bus services through Durham, or food services through OPA. So those are our purchase service items, and again, they're people. Supplies are about 8%. Debt payment is 7%, and that comes out of Fund 3. Out of our debt services fund. And then capital outlay is 3% of our expenditures. And capital outlay is things like your air conditioning units, your water mains, those large expenditures for maintenance equipment in particular. So part of that current reality, I'm going to go back to the revenue side a little bit. Again, 54% of our revenue comes in from local taxes, real estate, and personal property. This is a history of our assessed valuation from 2006 through 2017. That's pretty much what we call the recession years. And you can see why. So the assessed valuation either stayed a little bit up, a little bit down, but it was pretty much flat. So there was a 10-year period in there where assessed valuation grew less than 1% total. And so in 2008, I became a superintendent for the first time. And at the time, I was told that in the history of Missouri, there hadn't been any reduction in assessed valuation. Well, since then, in Cass County and the Harrisonville School District, it's happened 3 times. So it's historical changes. So we're in a time of historical changes. This is, again, where our real estate personal property taxes are generated from. Now, the Missouri Tax Commission came to the counties and basically said you're undervaluing property. You need to reassess. And so when that happened, you see what happened in Jackson County. It got ballooned way out of control. And so there's a lot of dissatisfied people, understandably so, in Jackson County with the way that was handled. I personally believe that it was handled a lot better in Cass County, but we did see an increase in assessed valuation. You can see the uptick in assessed valuation. It was not the rate that increased, but the value that increased. So that whole time that the assessed valuation is flat, that's good when you go to pay your taxes because your tax it stays the same for that 10-year period of time. It's bad when you go to sell your house because then the market value hasn't increased on your house in that same period of time. So you haven't gained any value on that. In theory, that's the way it works. But when the Missouri Tax Commission came out and said, okay, you need to reassess, and those market values started to climb, so then people saw their tax bill higher last year. That is true. Your tax bill went up. It wasn't your tax rate that went up. It was the market value went up. And so what we saw as a school district, I know there's been questions about $700,000. You had $700,000 additional in revenue last year. That is true. The concern is it doesn't go where you need it to go. Because of the Hancock Amendment to the Missouri Constitution that was passed in the early 80s, that revenue is limited on where it can go. So the state auditor will come out in the summertime, in the beginning of our fiscal year, and say what the consumer price index is, what that growth is allowed to be. And so last year the consumer price index was 1.9%. So even though the assessed valuation jumps up 10%, we are only allowed to put 1.9% growth in operating, which is where we need the money. The rest of that money was placed by the board into Fund 3, which is debt service to prepay existing debt that the school had through bonds. And so when that happened, it saved the taxpayers about $75,000 in interest rate. So that's a smart fiscal decision, in my opinion. And I wasn't one to recommend it, so. So we thank the board members who approved that. But again, you can't use that money once it's in debt service. You can't transfer it out and use it for salaries or for those improvements and maintenance to those buildings and equipment that you need. It stays in Fund 3 and pays debt. That's what it does. And you can't use that money for anything else. You can only increase that 1.9%. So that 1.9%, what did that mean? Out of that $700,000, we could use $140,000 in operating. So that was our increase last year in operating, $140,000. To put that in perspective, in our school district, we employ about 300 people, a little over 300 people. We gave a 3% raise, which is a modest average raise for most employers. We gave a 3% raise. That 3% raise, just in money, not in benefits, was $500,000 for our school district. So you're saying there's $500,000 you spent on raises, you got $140,000 additional in revenue. Where did the rest of that come from? And I will address that in a minute. But that's kind of our problem. So to keep up, in essence, a fair market for our employees, which we're still below, we didn't have the revenue to do that, so we had to make some cuts. The declining enrollment, this affects our state money. As I said, there's a little over 30% of our money comes in from enrollment. That number has gone down considerably. So from 2013 to 19, we lost 265 students in the district. That's about $1.1 million in revenue. So our enrollment goes down, state revenue goes down. Assessed value is limited on how much it can grow, 1.9%. So you can see we're extremely limited on how much revenue we're allowed to put into that operating money. So as a result, as those air conditioning units break down, as we have a 16% increase in health insurance rates, those type of things mean that your operating balances go down. And so in 2013 and 14, we were at $8.26 million in Fund 1, which is what we call the operating fund. In 2018 and 19, which is the end of last year, July 1, we had $5.99 million in Fund 1. By the end of this year, it'll probably be right around 5, just a little tick over 5. So in that short period of time, it's almost cut in half. Some of that money has gone to pay debt and other things as well. But we have these other issues that keep coming up that we need to pay for out of operating, which is really our only, the fund in essence. So levy comparisons to other school districts. So this is where we stand in comparison to some of our neighboring school districts. Pleasant Hill is a tick lower than us at 449. It's the only one of those school districts that we mentioned is lower than our total levy. Total levy's on the right. Shows you what our operating levy is, what the debt service levy is. Our operating levy currently sits at $3.90, which is our biggest concern. Our debt service is $1.17, so our total levy is $5.07 in essence per $100 of assessed valuation, and I'll explain that process in a minute. But so, as a taxpayer, if I wasn't working for the school district, my first question would be, what have you done to cut in order to meet that? So if I'm a business owner and I'm trying to operate a business, you have to make sure to make that profit margin that you cut in order to make that. So I get that. Same thing with my household budget. So our first step is we've got to reduce. And so what we did last year is we cut 8 staff positions, about $500,000 in expenditures for staff salaries and benefits. Again, that's to make up for that 3% plus the $140,000 that we got in assessed valuation. So that gave us a little plus on that side. However, when we have these things like a water main or air conditioning units go, that drains that operating resource as well. So we also moved to contracted services instead of in-house for food service and maintenance. We already had contracted services for bus through Durham and have had for years. But by moving to contracted services, what that did was it saved us particularly on insurance and benefits. So we talked about workers' comp. It saves us on workers' comp insurance. It saves us, so I mentioned the 16%. Our current bid for health insurance for next year for Blue Cross Blue Shield as our carrier is a 16% renewal increase for next year. Obviously, that's huge. So that 16% represents about $300,000, a little over $300,000 for our district for health insurance increases. So, what do we have to do? Well, we bid that out. We looked at other carriers who might be able to help us at a better rate. The other thing that we do is we look at our plan. How we can change our plan and make it less rich. So instead of a $2,500 deductible, our deductible goes up to $5,000. You know how that works. So there's changes there that can be made, but because we contract those other services, we have a set rate with them. So if for example, if Durham sees a 16% increase for the bus drivers in their health insurance increases, that doesn't get passed on to us as a consumer because we already know we have a set contracted price. And the same goes for all those contracted services. So we have that set price. It makes it easier for us to budget. We don't see that 16% jump on those other employees. So that's one way to help us on the budget side. We continue to use zero-based budgeting. So it's sometimes when you're not using zero-based budgeting, you can say, okay, every teacher gets $200 for supplies. And so some use it, some may not use it. We don't use that process. We use zero-based budgeting, which means we go to each person and we say, how much money do you need next year? Start with zero. If you have to have something, how much is it? And they'll say specifically what they need, and we build that into the budget that way. So it's a way of saving money. That's been going on quite a while since Dr. White was here. So, and then finally, we moved the middle school to a junior high format. So our grades 6, 7, and 8 are at Harrisonville Middle School. That's a different type of philosophy and how you team kids in particular. So there was a team time and a playing time for those teachers, and so it took some of that collaboration time away. And now that's why we changed that schedule on Thursday so they can have their early release and their collab time then. But what that does is it allows you to reduce staff. And actually, we were able to do that and keep our class sizes about the same or a little bit smaller. So it did positive things on the class size too. It reduced that. So, but it did require less staff, so we were able to reduce there through attrition as people left. So, what is Proposition I? So Proposition I is the increase So essentially what I say is we're going to the taxpayers who are our boss, and we're asking for an increase in salary. It is a 50-cent operating levy for the purpose of attracting and retaining quality staff through raises for teachers and classified staff, not just teachers, but classified staff as well. If it's approved, the adjusted operating of the levy will go from $3.90 per $100 assessed valuation to $4.40. So it allows us to free that up into Fund 2, which is our salaries. Proposition N, we call that the brick and mortar, the bond side. We're going to go to the bank and ask for a loan. That is a no tax rate increase bond issue for $22.7 million to meet needs for improvements in safety and security, replacing roofs, HVAC units, boilers. We'll talk about those heating and cooling systems. Technology, we say technology, we're talking about technology infrastructure like your wireless access points, your firewalls, not your computers, but actually the bare bones of it. And then completing, or playgrounds, I forgot to mention playgrounds. So we do provide some fencing around McEwen, which is the only playground that we have that doesn't have that, which is a safety feature. Also some additional playground equipment for students with disabilities. We'd like to move the playground to ECC on the other side of the road, so we don't have a road going through our playground. That would be helpful. And move it closer to the building, provide some more disabled playground equipment as well. And then other maintenance and repairs and improvements that we identified through a facility needs survey that was done in 2006 with our architect, or 2016, with our architect firm of Hollis & Miller. Passage of this measure is actually 10-cent debt levy rollback. So combined, the two with a 50-cent improvement increase on I and 10-cent decrease on N, the net is a 40-cent increase. How are these measures developed? So back in 2016, actually before I was superintendent, the board commissioned the architectural firm of Hollis & Miller to do a needs assessment, and where they went through with the principals, directors, and different people at that time to identify those facility needs. And then we've used that for our maintenance plan since that point to try to address those needs. There are a lot of needs identified in there. So originally it was about $25 million in needs. That's grown because of the cost of those things, but the district's been able to perform a little over $3 million worth of those improvements on there. So in those 4 years. So additional parts of the planning process. So last year, my first year as superintendent. So when I came in, of course, the district interviews me, and I do research on the district as well. And I did have some concerns about the financial status of the district, but I felt like those are things that we can work through as a community. When we got to the point in March where I visited with a lot of community members to help identify some of those needs, I was able to share in a community conversation about a year ago my thoughts on where we were, where we stood, and where we needed to go. And so that kind of morphed into strategic planning process. We had the strategic planning committee that was formed and met continuously throughout the fall, and identified specific needs that we needed to focus on. And two of those were attracting and retaining high quality staff, and then maintaining our facilities and safety and security. And then the board approved the propositions I and N to be placed on the April ballot in January of 2020. So that's how we got to that point. So why do we need Proposition I? Why are we asking for a raise, in essence, for our staff? Again, it allows us to attract and keep quality staff, increases the base pay for teachers to be competitive with surrounding districts. So just to give you some reference, our average salary is about $44.5, while the Missouri average is $50,000. So we're a little over $5,000 below the Missouri State teacher average in pay. Now, someone can say, well, you have all young teachers, so that's why your rate is lower. Actually, our tenure for our staff is above the state average, so it kind of puts that in comparison to what we pay. I'm going to go ahead and flip it, Jill. Thanks. So this, again, using those same school districts that we talked about on the levy comparison, this is our salary comparison. So we are actually the lowest of all those school districts on the chart in our starting salaries. So, you know, we lost a good teacher last year to Lee Summit, and that teacher took a $12,000 raise to go to Lee Summit. That happens quite a bit, unfortunately. But people say, we can't compare yourself to Lee Summit. They have more resources, which is true. They do have more resources. It'd be difficult to catch up to them. We lose teachers to RAPEC. RAPEC pays about $3,000 more on the base than we do, and you can see what happens when you get over to the right. They far exceed where we are by almost $20,000. People say, well, RAPEC's bigger than you. They've got more resources. You really can't compare yourself to RAPEC. Well, okay, let's compare ourselves to Cass Midway. So Cass Midway is a quarter of our size, so they're smaller than we are. They start their teachers at almost $3,000 more than our starting salary is. And so by the end, we catch up and surpass them, but it's at that starting point that really has an impact. And a couple things I want to mention with this. So Missouri starting teacher salaries, as quoted by Governor Parsons, is actually the second lowest of any state in the United States. There's only one state that pays their starting teachers less than we do, and that's Montana. And so it used to be, when I was a kid, when I started teaching, it was Mississippi, and nobody wanted to be lower than Mississippi. Well, now I guess it's Montana and Missouri. Nobody wants to be lower than. So, and you can see we're at the bottom end of that for starting salaries. So, you can back up just a second, Jill. Sorry, it's okay. But I don't want to just talk about certified staff. I want to talk about classified staff too. So classified staff are our secretaries, our paras, and so that's a huge concern for me as well. And how this became evident to me personally. So my sons, my two youngest sons, I've got 4 kids. My 2 youngest are in high school here in Harrisonville, and my 2 sons went to work last summer at McDonald's. I don't know everybody that's heard this presentation has heard this story before, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So I think it's a good analogy of what happens. So my 2 sons went to work. One son I have, Kyle, he was over 16 when they started work, so he got paid a little bit more than Jackson did. And so he was actually flipping the burgers. He was in the back cooking the burgers. When he came home with his first paycheck, I looked at his pay stub, and his hourly rate was more, than what we pay our paraprofessionals and our building secretaries at start. And so if you don't know what a paraprofessional is, I'm going to give you some example of what they do. Paraprofessional is somebody who works with students with special needs. They get bit, they get spit on, they get kicked, and I can tell you they have a great love for children because they endure a lot. You know, to put that in comparison, that's an adult versus a 16-year-old kid, and just the work that they put in. Our building secretaries are the first line of defense. If somebody comes, if somebody's upset with something that's happened at school, whether it's a building or even in the central office, the first person they talk to is the secretary. And I can tell you, usually by the time it gets to me, people are calm and they're rational, but they're not always that way with our secretaries. They can be downright mean to them sometimes. So they do a great job, and they are always nice and kind, and they take that in hand. It's a difficult job. So difficult jobs that are getting paid, in my opinion, not what they deserve to be paid. And so people say to me, well, you've got the checkbook, go ask the board, give them a raise. As I demonstrated earlier, our operating reserves are cut almost in half. We can't do that. We can't continue to deficit spend. So we have to continue to get to the point where we're not deficit spending, and then still make sure these people get a decent salary. So that's where the request for the increase comes from. So why Proposition N? This is the bond side. So this is the going to the bank and asking for the home improvement. So we have several safety concerns for our staff and our students. Of course, we have entrance vestibules we have entrances that don't have vestibules. So a vestibule is a two-door system that provides security for students and staff. If you go to our early childhood center, our youngest kids, there's a single door entry, and then you're right at the secretary. It's really not as safe as it needs to be. We need a dual entrance vestibule to provide that additional layer of security. We have a couple of buildings that are that way. Safety film on glass, that's crucial in particular to classrooms where students might be barricaded for safety, so to make sure that an intruder couldn't get in there. So that's what that is for. Fire system upgrades. I mentioned the playground fence at McEwen. And then our learning environment. So we have aging infrastructure. I talked about that earlier. We have 63 out of 105 of our rooftop units that are 15 years old or older. And if the commercial lifespan of one of those units, or the lifespan of a commercial unit, rooftop unit, is 15 years. So they've reached the end of their lifspan in essence. Now we keep them going. We have an awesome maintenance staff who's able to maintain those. So if you have a heat exchanger that rusts out because water condensation builds in, they can replace that, and it's cost effective to do that. If you have a compressor that goes out, that's another issue on a rooftop unit, because it means you've got to bring in a crane to replace that compressor. It becomes more cost efficient at that point to replace the whole unit, especially because by the time the compressor goes out, the heat exchanger has already gone out. So you're talking about two parts or several parts on the unit that go bad. That happened recently in January on our band room. We had a unit go bad. We got to bring a crane in to replace that unit. That's a $10,000 unit. We had another unit at McEwen not too long ago. It was a $20,000 unit. So it depends on the size of the unit and how much it costs. That's roughly what it costs, $10,000 to $20,000. 63 of those things are at the end of their lifespan. We have leaky roofs, and the one that probably is the biggest glaring issue is at the Cass Career Center. We have water leaks on a welder. That's obviously a horrible thing, and so we'd like to fix that. We have boilers in need of replacement. So some of where we have the rooftop units, we don't use boiler systems. The boiler system is an older heating system, but in the middle school and ECC in particular, we use boiler systems. The ECC over Christmas break had two boilers. Both units were down. Our maintenance staff was able to keep them working. Did a great job, but again, at some point that expires, and so they're on the slate to be replaced too. So playgrounds, I mentioned that. Track resurfacing. So we get a lot of questions. So even on the survey, when we did the blueprint survey back in the fall, had a lot of questions about the stadium, about football, all that stuff. There are a couple of items on there on the bond that need to be addressed. The track has never been resurfaced since it was put down. That all-weather track, it needs to be resurfaced. We have a lot of community members that use the track. It's a very popular thing, and we need to take care of it. There are some safety concerns there, people getting hurt. There's a wall, a retaining wall on the south side that's got water that's built up behind it and causes it to eventually fail. So we need to make sure that we take care of that as well. Those two are on there. People ask, well, are you going to use it for uniforms for the football team? Or no, that doesn't happen. I'm not going to say that our football team doesn't get nice things. They do. However, we have some very generous anonymous donors who contribute to specific programs. One of those programs that gets looked at under a microscope by a lot of people is a football program, and we have people that donate to that particular program, and yes, we take donations. So if anybody wants to give for a specific program, we're never going to turn that down. But that just kind of goes into that. So why do you do football uniforms every so often or whatever? And I couldn't even tell you what it is, but a lot of that's paid for through the donations. So. And then technology infrastructure. I mentioned the networks, the wireless access points in particular, and then firewall upgrades. So, Proposition N. One thing that I thought was very interesting. So, when we started talking about bond and what things need to be covered and how much money, all those things, we had a steering committee that was established, and one of the questions they asked is, how much bonding capacity do you have? So bonding capacity in Missouri for schools is established by state statute, and that statute says you can borrow, just like going to the bank, you have a borrowing limit. Well, the statute in Missouri says you can borrow 15% of your assessed valuation. So what we have left in our assessed valuation beyond what we've already borrowed is $25 million. And so when the steering committee met, they said, we don't really feel comfortable using all of that $25 million. We would feel better if we used less. So we came up with a plan where we would borrow $22.7 million. We would use $2.7 million to prepay some lease purchase certificates and roll that into bonds, which actually saves interest because it's a higher interest rate for lease purchase than it is for bond rates. So that saves us some money. The rest of the $20 million would address that needs assessment that was established in 2016. So we would go through that, and I know Jason's met with our architects, and we've gone through that to see areas that we can, just to update that needs assessment from 2016, and what we can do to make those adjustments to get to that 20 million number. Then when the bids come back, that's when you have to go through with the pencil and say, we can afford this, we can't afford this, and those type of things. So, again, it's a 10-cent rollback if that measure passes in our current debt service levy. So that's actually tax savings on the bond side. So, thanks, Jim. If both those issues pass on April 7th, Tuesday, April 7th is the election. I've said that hopefully a time or two. April 7th, Tuesday, April 7th. The operating levy would increase from $390 to $440. The debt service levy would decrease from $1.17 to $1.07. The total district levy would increase from $507 to $547 per $100 of assessed valuation. So if your home market value is $150,000, your additional tax rate would be $9.50 a month. Basically the size or the cost of a movie ticket. I think that's what they are, about $10 probably per month. So how is assessed valuation calculated? A lot of people ask me that. How do I know what the assessed value of my house is? So if the market value of your home is $100,000, Missouri tax law says that your assessed value of your real estate is 19% of the market value. So if your home is valued at $100,000, the market value or the assessed value of your home is $19,000. So you take that number, you divide it by 100 to calculate your assessed value per $100. So, and then you multiply that number times the levy. And obviously there's different levies in the district, right? There's the library levy, there's our levy, there's fire levy. So there's varying levies. And then you got county levy too. So there's varying levies. But it is valued at 19% of your real estate. Okay, so personal property is a different calculation, and really, people want to talk about businesses. I hear a lot about businesses and what are they kicking in. Commercial property is taxed at the highest rate of 33%. So we're very grateful for the businesses and what they contribute. And so when you look at Elise Summit compared to us, yes, they've got a lot more of that assessed value because of that commercial property. We have a lot more than an Archie, let's say, because of the commercial value. So business owners do a great job of kicking in too. So the total impact. So if Proposition I passes, which is again the levy increase, it would yield approximately $1.18 million for staff salaries based on the current assessed value. So as the assessed value goes up, that money could increase. Now, that is based on a 100% collection rate. We don't collect 100%. So we actually pay a collector's fee. Every county, every taxing entity pays a 2.5% collector's fee. And so you take that off. Not everybody pays their taxes, so you have to make an estimate of what percentage of people won't pay their taxes. So generally, when we estimate revenues, we estimate between 93 and 95% collection rate. So Proposition N is the bond side. Again, it allows us to take care of those immediate needs. Proposition I will talk about that. So we say, okay, you're going to get an additional $1.18 million. Well, that's why I mentioned how much an increase, a 3% increase for our staff, $500,000. So if we give our staff 3% raise, there's $500,000. 16% increase on health insurance, there's $300,000. There's $800,000 out the window before we even start. So, that's what we're talking about, catching up. I can cut us so we don't deficit spend. I say I mean the board and I, we calculate the budget. We can cut so we don't deficit spend anymore. But you can't cut your way to those increases for our staff that need to occur. So, one question I get asked, thanks Jill, sorry. One question I get asked a lot is about percentages. So what percentage is everybody going to get? So my proposal is actually not based on a percentage because if I give a 3% increase, or I recommend to the board that there's a 3% increase for all staff members, 3% increase for the superintendent means a lot more than 3% for a secretary. So my proposal is that we go with a flat amount. So if we say everybody gets $1,000, well, $1,000 again to the secretary, to the paraprofessional, that percentage is a lot higher than the percentage that comes to the superintendent or the principals. So really, we understand our administration is grateful for where we're at, but we understand we're here fighting for teachers, paraprofessionals, secretaries. That's the group we're fighting for, and so we feel like we can get their percentage increase up there. That's what we need to hit and take care of them. So, what happens if they don't pass? They are two separate issues. Okay, so we're talking about two separate propositions. Again, one because we're talking about an increase that we're asking from our employer. One we're talking about borrowing. So they're two separate issues in the funding process, government funding. So one could pass and the other not pass. That's a complete possibility. Of course, we hope both issues pass, but it could go multiple ways. So what will we do? We've talked about possible salary freezes for all staff, and I say possible because this isn't the purpose of this presentation or all our presentations to be informative, not threatening. So we're not here saying, by golly, if you don't pass these issues, we're going to cut the boys soccer team. That's not the proper way to do things, because we're going to have to reevaluate as a team of the board members and administration. We'll have to reevaluate at that time. What do we do? Obviously, our most expensive thing is salaries, right? So we've talked about possible salary freezes. We have to get to a point where we cut $1 million to get to where we're not deficit spending anymore. That's the number we have to get to. And the facilities will continue to deteriorate. So we're talking about rooftop units that are old. They're going to continue to fail. Water mains are going to continue to fail. So we understand that. And that'll cause, because of those things continue to happen, that'll cause that reserve to continue to be drained out. Even with the passage of these issues, regardless of the passing of these issues, we're going to continue to cut. The board cut 8 positions last year. We've cut 2.5 this year. I estimate that we will cut at least 5 more through attrition at the next board meeting. So we're going to continue to evaluate that because our enrollment's declined. And so we have to look at how do we right-size the district in comparison to our enrollment that's declined. And that's what we've gone through the process of doing. Just comparison to programs. When we look at all things, not just salaries, we look at programs. Sorry, Jill. We're ready to go.
You're fine, sorry. No.
So we have to look at programs, not just staff, we look at programs. So we look at sports, for example, okay? So I talked to Coach Maxwell, we talked as an administrative team, different things that we can cut. Coach Maxwell says, okay, this is our philosophy. We think, people think, well, what if you cut out middle school sports? Coach Maxwell comes to me and he says, we can cut out middle school sports, but the opportunities for kids are far less at the middle school than they are at the high school. What if we cut out C-team sports where kids can still participate in those activities and have other opportunities? And so C-team sports, for example, how much do you save by cutting C-team sports? Coach Maxwell put together the stipends that are paid for those positions, the entry fees, the travel fees. It's about $15,000. So $15,000 by cutting an entire system of programs for essentially our freshmen versus one salary. And you saw the average teacher salary is about $45,000. So you can cut programs, but it's a lot of programs to get to that $1 million. So it's a combination of a lot of things to get to that point. Okay, thanks, Jill. So again, Proposition I is a 50-cent increase in operating, which is really where we need that money. It takes a simple majority, so that the easy aspect of that proposition is that it takes 50% plus one. The difficult part is you're asking people for a tax increase. Nobody wants to increase their taxes. I don't want to increase my taxes, if you trust me. Nobody wants to do it, but we're at that point where we can't cut our way to prosperity. Proposition N, the bond side, brick and mortar, is a no tax rate bond issue. So you're telling people actually it's a rollback of 10 cents. So that's the more favorite people hear that. They're like, oh, hey, that sounds better. The more difficult part of that is because you're asking to borrow money, it requires a higher percentage to pass. It requires 4/7, which is 57% to pass. The last time that these two issues were placed on a ballot was 20 years ago. It's kind of strange for that to happen because typically you run one or the other, but because of the state of where we're in, we felt like we needed to run both of these issues. Last time this occurred was 20 years ago. Actually, the last time a voter-approved levy increase occurred in Harrisonville School District was 20 years ago. And these two issues were on the ballot. You had a bond and you had a levy increase, and both of them passed. And the percentages were really strong, so it's supported at that time. So, voter registration deadline is passed, unfortunately. So if you haven't registered, it's past time. Absentee voting began February 25th. You can still vote by absentee ballot. So we've got some time for questions. One of the questions I hear, probably the most popular question I hear is, I don't live in the city limits, but I live in the school district. Can I vote? Yes, you can. For example, if you live out on 2 Highway by the water tower, can you vote? Yes, you can vote. Your kids go to school here, and you live in our school district, you can vote. The only exception to that is East-Lynn. So East-Lynn is a separate school district. So the East-Lynn School District pays for their students once they become high schoolers to come to our school district. It's a tuition that they pay. Because they're a separate school board and a separate school district, those people are not able to vote on our issues.